to the Coalesce podcast. My name's Grant.
And I'm Meg.
And today we are actually going back. This is going to be episode 0, but we're really a ways in. And we realized when we started, episode 1 really just jumps right in and shows you how to use Coalesce. And we've gotten a lot of questions about, well, what is Coalesce? Why would I want to use it? And what does it do for me? And so we just wanted to take a few minutes to go through. We actually have some slides, which we just dive right into code. But we have some slides to kind of talk through, hey, what does this look like? And how or why would I actually want to use Coalesce? So anyway, the correct pronunciation, some people have said Coalesce, but it really is Coalesce. And that's the idea of kind of bringing things together and forming one thing. So anyway, so the way Coalesce started, just a quick little bit of history. I built a bunch of different web projects, and I got tired of building all of the things that it takes to build a web project. And this was primarily like, if you want to do a drop-down box that isn't a drop-down of objects that are somewhere else in your code or in your database, that's hard. And if you wanted to do searching and sorting and all of the things, and then doing like automatic saves and all of those kinds of things, just got kind of boring. And I would end up finding like you'd make objects on your server side, which you'd store in your database, then you'd have DTOs, and the DTOs would then be on your client side if you're going to use like TypeScript or JavaScript. And making a nice kind of first-class experience, it takes a lot of effort, rather than just like throwing some MVC pages together or something like that, and having to submit every page and kind of using the built-in ASP.NET stuff. It just wasn't that great. And so we wanted to, well, at least for me, I wanted to make the web development and like take out the lame parts, which were a lot of the boilerplate stuff, and put in the fun stuff. And so this was really wanting to do just my boredom and wanting to do that. And then that's probably close to a number of years ago, at least now. And there's been a lot of changes. Started originally with Knockout and now as Vue and a whole bunch of other stuff. So Coalesce does all of that boring stuff for you. And let's do the fun stuff. And when I say fun stuff, I would say that's like making your data models, how you're going to model out your actual database and your business models, writing your business logic code, and then really writing those really nice user experiences. So Meg, what has your experience been? You've been using Coalesce for now, what, about 3 years?
About 3 years. I think my experience is, about what you said, right? It does do all that middle stuff for you. What I really like about it is it feels like you can get quickly. You don't need to do all of that middle bit where you're writing your model, and you kind of just have to duplicate that a couple of times from your back end all the way to your front end.
Right.
That's all kind of done for you. The other really nice thing that I like about it is that it allows for very consistent code in the middle there, because you're not having to duplicate it. And every time you duplicate something, your consistency gets worse and worse. Right? So I really like that. It allows for really, really nice experience on the front end as well. It really just feels like you're making code against the C# model you just wrote, even though you're making it against some TypeScript model that's generated off of your C# model, where if you wrote that yourself, I'm a bit of a lazy dev. I wouldn't.
Yeah, right.
Really, it's nice.
I think we are.
I wouldn't be keeping that much of an immaculate intermediate between my back end and my front end. It would be a little bit more rough just for that trade-off of wanting to do it faster. So That's what I like about Coalesce, is it does it really well, does it really neatly, and it does it really quickly.
Yeah, and I just find that I look forward to writing code, because I'm writing code that I feel like adds value and adds significant value. And I think as we've been using this, we've been using this on a lot of projects now, and it's at least 2x and sometimes 3x as you get a team that has used it a lot. That's really how much faster your teams are going to go. So again, there is a little ramp up, and we've chosen technologies really intentionally, and we've done things very intentionally to make it so that the learning curve is not very steep, and that all the things in here, we really try to color in and not do a bunch of weird stuff. And if there is complex things, which there are some very, very complex things inside Coalesce, they're hidden. And they're a black box that you really don't ever have to touch. And we tried to make those abstractions not leak.
Yeah, so I'd say Coalesce has a very small ramp up. Like, you can probably start writing a Coalesce app very, very quickly.
As soon as you go through all these videos that you made.
Yeah, as soon as you go through all 200 videos or something. No, you can start writing an app right after episode 1. So the one right after this episode that we recorded before this episode. But you can start writing an app right away. I think the hard parts with Coalesce is really just getting a deep understanding of what it's doing for you.
And that's what we want to talk about a little bit today. So.
Yeah. So Coalesce, kind of like what we were just saying, it's a framework kind of used to speed up your development. Specifically, it's a web development framework, and it is open source, so you can go view all the source code.
Right out there on GitHub.
Yeah,
Just if you Google Coalesce and Teletext, you'll find it.
yeah. And it is also a .NET tool for the boilerplate code generation, very similar to kind of what EF does for you with that code gen. And then, yeah, like Grant said, it's built with TypeScript, Vue, Vueify, and those were very intentionally chosen. Vue is kind of one of the easier of the big three frameworks to kind of learn.
It provides a pretty full feature set as well.
Yeah.
So the one of the things that I like to kind of an analogy I make is so years ago I did a lot of access programming, and a lot of people did because it was a really fast way to connect your database to a user interface, and it kind of eliminated all that, but it was a thick client and they were a little janky and there was all kinds of weirdness inside there. And so, but there was this really nice idea that I can move from an idea to an application really fast. And then for those of us who used Visual Basic or Visual Basic.NET a little bit, maybe just that idea, yeah, I could build a thick client application relatively fast, that rapid application development. So I think what a Coalesce really brings back is a lot of those same kind of ideas, but taking them forward into what would be considered kind of best practice web development. You're making a single page application. If you want to do that, you can do other things with it. But primarily that's the way to go about it. And so really saying, hey, I want to build something, I want to do it fast, but I want it to be deployable to Azure or wherever you want to deploy it, and having it run in services and be scalable and have basically a static front end you can run your backend stuff against and all that. So we try to kind of hit that sweet spot in the middle of that.
Yeah, which kind of brings us to this slide here.
Yes. Oh, here I'm going forward just a little bit. So really, the main goal when we start out making this was to make developers happier, right? This is about being able to be productive, to feel like you're in the flow, to not have to do things that you would consider kind of a waste of time that don't require thinking, right? And as we look at AI and things like that, I think OS is really positioned well because it does those things so that then the AI is going to be way smarter because you have all these things. You don't have to build a lot of these models, and it builds them rather than AI kind of getting them mostly right. It builds them right.
Yeah, it's deterministic rather than AI being that
non-deterministic. Yeah,
does it this way one time, but then this way the other time. It's like, oh, that's not consistent.
Yeah, absolutely, and really allows focusing on architecture and design. Like that's where the thinking part. And again, with AI can fill in the gaps, right? But you have to do the thinking about, hey, how do I want to model this environment that I'm trying to actually build an application around it, and really working on that front end design. Like I don't want to wrestle with how to pass this data or how do I represent this, that, or the other thing. I mean, you have to do that a little bit, I guess, but really how do I build my components and what should they look like? And how do I want to structure some of those things that are less deterministic and just less kind of out of the box boilerplate stuff?
Yeah, it's also kind of there to just help you fall into that bit of success of just getting stuff right most of the time.
Yeah, right.
That way you're not trying to guess how you should be writing some of these things. It's all done for you.
Right. I call your save and load code and making your API calls and how do you configure things, how do you do security? Yeah. Those things are kind of taken care of for you. Now you can override all this stuff, and again, we're generating code, so you can go do whatever you want after that. But it does help you to really hit the right spot there.
Yeah, and that's a great point because for the beginner devs, it kind of takes away that initial having to think about that.
Right.
For the more advanced devs, it takes it away, but you can go and customize that, and it benefits you as an advanced developer because if you're on a team, or even if you're by yourself, you can go customize it in this one spot, and then Coalesce will kind of generate that for you and keep that code consistent, that middle code kind of consistent.
Yeah, and we don't want to tie you in forever. Like if you decide to use this at the beginning and then you're going to build your own stuff, you can totally do that. And there's ways of kind of using this where you can either step away from it or step more into it. It's nice that way.
Yeah, and I won't be able to quote the docs exactly, but the docs say something along the lines of Coalesce is supposed to be very extendable and very customizable. Because like Grant just said, we don't want to lock you in. We want you to be able to use the tool, lean into it as much as you want, and customize it as much as you want, and as much as you need. And I mean, it is open source, so if you really needed something super custom, you could always kind of fork it and do your own thing that you needed to do.
Right. And there's a lot of times folks will use it because it does provide these things called admin pages. And so they may just use it for that. And then they actually build large chunks of it by hand. And then an app I'm working on right now, it has a back end, which is kind of the admin side, which that uses all Coalesce, but then the front end just uses part of Coalesce. We can kind of talk about some of those ways you can do that. So, and then really using standard tooling and practices. So we're trying to keep this kind of on the edge. It's using all of the latest tooling. You'll find that as when you download it, you build a project, you're going to be on the latest versions of all kinds of things. It uses all of the pieces that allow you to do just have really nice developer experiences like IntelliSense for your TypeScript on your front end, and automate hot page reloading. You just change something in your UI and it'll update on the screen. It just all of these things that make development a joy, or at least for me, like wanting to get stuff done. It's really great. So,
and that's a great transition to our next slide.
Here we go. What does it take? So, Meg, when you set up a development environment, what are your typical kind of steps to get it going?
Yeah. So to be clear, this is like kind of what we recommend, but you don't need to.
You don't have to.
You don't need to be using this, right? I like to use Visual Studio for a lot of my C# development, and I like to use VS Code for a lot of my front end development. You can use whatever you want, though.
And this is kind of like on the Windows platform, although we have a number of folks that use this on either a Mac or a Linux platform as well. I mean, it works fine. You just really don't get the Visual Studio part of it, which is really the C# kind of debugging, but everything's just command line. It all runs in all the platforms. So
yeah, this is more of just a general preference, like for C# developers. Most of them do like Visual Studio because Microsoft made Visual Studio, Microsoft made C#, and they just work very nicely together because of that. So you can use really any IDE, but Visual Studio is the one that we would recommend. VS Code is great for that front end stuff. I really wouldn't recommend.
Yeah, it's going to work there better than anything
Visual
else.
Studio.
Do not use Visual Studio for front end.
You definitely can, but don't do it. And then we're typically up to date on the latest version of .NET.
And we usually lag just a little bit. I think we're getting ready to do the latest one. We're recording this in late October, so the new version of .NET will come out here in November. And so that we're usually just a few weeks away from being on whatever the latest is.
So kind of usually around like the other typical packages that stay up to date on things. Just take a week or two to get up to date after they release.
Yeah, and as far as database goes, you can really use whatever you want. We like to use SQL Server, the local DB. Just is a really nice development experience, especially if you're on Windows or if you can get it to work on your whatever ARM processor you're using if you're going that direction too. So lots of options there. You're really not locked in. There's a few things we'll talk about that, hey, this is the way it comes out of the box. If you don't want to do this, it's probably a better thing to use something else. But as far as tooling goes, this is kind of what we recommend.
Yeah. So we've covered kind of the tools that you can use for it, what it's supposed to do for you, and what it is. So maybe we should take a look at what happens when
what does it actually do?
Yeah,
like what does Coalesce do for you?
So here is kind of the overview of the template. And you guys, if you watch episode 1, you've seen the template, but that was the old template. So there's a new template now. It's not that different. It's very similar. You still get your data project and your web project and that test project and the server or the database server. But now you have this new thing, the CI pipelines. And then you also have a bunch of additional options to set up some starter code with.
Right, because initially we just had a regular template. You got the same thing every time. But then we realized, hey, there's all this other boilerplate code that really takes a long time to set up. And people sometimes it doesn't get set up quite right. And so like doing the auth and doing tenancy, and there's just a whole bunch of things that it kind of sets up for you. Now, you may decide, I don't want it the way Coalesce sets it up, but at least we're going to give you something out of the box. Like especially tenancy is really tricky to set up because you have to get your database right and have all your objects and do some inheritance things and all that. And this basically just sets it up for you right out of the box and gives you a really nice tenancy model. So if you want to make a multi-tenant app, it works pretty well. So
which we'll dig into kind of all that in another slide. So
so basically you end up with a data project, you end up with a web project. So all your data stuff, that's all your EF, all of that, and then you have your web project, and that really has two pieces. You have your MVC part of your, not MVC part of your app, but your ASP.NET part of your app, and then you have effectively embedded inside of that a Vue 3 app using the composition API. And then there's a separate unit testing project, and you can make more of those. And then you get some CI pipelines. You have to build some CD pipelines. If there's enough need for that, we could kind of.
CI pipelines, that's optional. So you don't have to include that in the template, but it's a thing that would be included if you check the box when you're.
Yeah, and either for GitHub or for Azure DevOps. You can do it either way. And it's just YAML, and it has all the command lines. And so it's really easy if you want to transition if you're using Jenkins or whatever.
And I think an important thing here too is that Coalesce will only generate files. So once you make the template, you have all your stuff set up, right? So it gives you a template project. But when you run .NET Coalesce, it will only ever generate files in your ASP.NET.
In your web project,
app,
right?
And in your TypeScript app.
Yeah, it
So-
never touches your data project. So it's only, so it will compile your data project, just like EF does. It compiles your data project, but instead of writing like the migrations go back to your data project, this will only write into your web project.
Yep, it'll read from your data project and
Yep,
right into your
that's
web
where it
project.
gets everything.
You do need that NuGet package on both projects, and you do need the TypeScript package, but it just reads. So just an important thing to kind of realize. And it reads specifically from a couple of places. And Grant can correct me if I miss one, but it should read from your AppDB context. And then if you tag any classes with the Coalesce service attribute, it'll read from those as well. And then if you tag any functions, like custom functions on your models, it'll grab those.
Right.
So a couple spots that it grabs information from. So it uses your AppDB context and uses some reflection to grab information.
Yep. And that's all driven out of a Coalesce config file that you can change around if you want.
Yep.
All right, let's kind of talk about what you get right out of the, we talked about this a little bit about the template, right? So you get your core data project. So just as far as what you get right out of the box, you're going to get an AppDB context. This is just, you get one of those kind of as a scaffolding one. And if you want kind of a dummy object, you can have that, just one that is going to be a sample. And then you're going to have an option for tenancy, which is going to provide you things like a base class that you can apply to all of your objects that then essentially at the EF level are going to inject your tenancy directly in there. So it's basically impossible. I should say nothing is impossible to mess up, but it's much more difficult to mess that up because it's done at the EF level and you don't have to handle it at the level of your app unless you're dealing with non-tenanted objects, which are like your things that you have to do as an admin to admin your tenancy. You're still going to build that on your own. It's going to use identity and build that in as well as OAuth. So you can do OAuth or regular. It's going to build in the ASP.NET Core identity and then either Google or Microsoft OAuth and maybe more in the future. And then actually individual accounts is rolling out here very shortly. So.
Yeah, and then you have some auditing, which we did show how to set up auditing, I believe.
Yeah, and auditing's cool because it allows you to track changes and it does it to its own table and then provides a really nice UI. So you can go find changes really easily. So it's almost like a Hangfire or something like that would do that, where you'd have a little UI built in.
It's about as easy as Hangfire is to set.
It's easier than Hangfire, yeah.
It's like 2 lines, but if there's an option to just include it in your template when you generate it, just so you don't even have to worry about it. And then the helpers are just things like little auth helpers. And there's some swagger
like
stuff.
Finding your ID, your user ID off of your claims principal.
Yeah,
right? That kind of
like
stuff.
getting a profile picture, stuff like that. And these are all optional things. You don't need the generated template with tenancy if you don't want to use tenancy. It's all optional.
Yeah, and that's why we have this new this new templating, because you can choose, do I want this or not? And then obviously if you want to add it, you can just generate a new one and then diff it, and it works pretty well. So it's pretty easy. And then it doesn't actually generate your database. It is going to set up everything so your database is connected. You do have to run a migration to add your migration, that initial migration that'll add, if you have all like tenancy and stuff like that built in, or any kind of identity, all that stuff's going to get added to the database in that first migration. So
make sure you run that migration. Okay, this is the web project.
There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, it's just because this is kind of where Coalesce is mostly touching, so that's why it looks so crazy. So I guess I mentioned Swagger, but Swagger is technically over here. And then we've got the program.cs with all the configured options. So when you make your template, you'll get your program.cs. It'll have everything kind of configured in there for you. So if you've selected auth, it'll have your auth configured. And your auth isn't in line in the program.cs. It's actually in a little separate config class that program.cs references, just so it doesn't get cluttered in there. But it will hook that up for you. It'll hook Swagger up if you've selected that. It'll hook your auditing up if you've selected that. All the things. It'll hook up Coalesce for you.
And then let's talk about this generated stuff. So this is really where Coalesce starts to do things. And so whenever you run the .NET Coalesce, which is the command line that you'll run, whenever I make a change to my data project, you go ahead and run .NET Coalesce, and that will then regenerate all of the code that isn't required, or just the code that actually has changed. And so what that looks like is, so you get generated DTOs. And so these are C# pieces of code that represent your models and any models that you reference. And so it'll pick up models. If I made a service or something like that, it'll pick those things up and automatically generate DTOs for those. And those are basically just security trimmed little objects that allow you to pass things back and forth. And this allows me to update surgically and do things like that. And then those have counterparts on the TypeScript side as well. And then it also generates, using those DTOs, API controllers. And so you don't get like a typical MVC thing, which that's good, but you just get an API service. And so for each thing that you expose, you're going to get a controller. When I say thing that you expose, it's either a class POCO on your context, or if you expose a service, those will be generated as API controllers. And so those API controllers then have endpoints like list and delete and get, and there's a save method. And those use the DTOs to transfer the data across. And those DTOs do come with security trimming, because security is kind of built into Coalesce, because you have to build in at that level. So I can choose, hey, do I want this either class to be read-only, or a property to be read-only or not visible, or whatever it is. You have lots of control over how that happens. And then there's actually a set of security pages that this generates for you that will show you exactly what it's doing from a security point of view, which is really nice, because you can just go down through and look at it, and things that are open are kind of marked in red.
Yep.
So you can go down and see really quickly. And so you don't make a mistake accidentally of exposing something that you didn't want to expose.
Yeah, I'll tell you each CRUD endpoint, like your get, your list, your save, your delete, it'll show you all your endpoints and what permissions are on each of those.
Right. It's great.
All that kind of stuff. So, and something else that you get out of the template, especially if you pick multi-tenancy or auth, you get some auth razor pages added on for you. So that just means that, so I think the reason that they're razor pages is because it's sometimes hard to expose pages with Coalesce, because Coalesce by default is trying to put security on things. So adding razor pages is kind of an easier way to get around trying to expose them with your view router and trying to expose them with Coalesce.
Right. And the reason we do this is because Coalesce uses cookie auth by default. You don't have to. You can actually use JWTs if you want to use those instead. But we do use cookie auth. And so that's why for the multi-tenancy part is that you take a page navigation in those cases. And so this just gives you a little bit of flexibility. Again, if you want to redo this part, you can. It just gives you all the infrastructure to do that. So if you want to go back and rewrite this so that you can handle it another way, totally fine. Use a JWT and provide that information another way. Totally fine for that kind of scenario. But this was kind of the default one that allows you to do some of those logins, because you do have to take some page navigations for some of the OAuth options as well, at least in some cases.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not impossible to expose your view pages with Coalesce to just about anybody, but it's just a little bit, there's more hoops to jump through than the hoops to jump through to do it with a razor page. So if you have a really basic page where it's just a login page, just throw it on a razor page. It's a lot easier. If you do need to have like a public landing page, it's possible to do.
Yep.
Maybe we'll cover that in front of you.
Yeah, and the routing is all kind of set up for you out of the box. So the view knows how to handle that, which pages to route, which pages not to route. Again, you can go, it's all this straight view on that side. So once you load up your app, you know what's going on. And so it's really straightforward. And so because we're intercepting at least some of those calls, the kind of dance between the view router, which is routing pages once your SPA starts, and the router that's inside ASP.NET Core, those work together to be able to serve up the right pages. So again, go to the routing sections in each one of those, and you'll be able to see how all that works. So let's talk a little bit about the front end and what you get. So the types, so more generated TypeScript models and view models. And so I forget if we have a few more slides on this, but
we have a slide after this to tell you what ones you're working on making, what ones Coalesce.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's cool. So you basically get the models, which we'll talk about in a second. You're going to get some admin pages, which admin pages are actually generated on the fly. So you're not going to have just a whole bunch of admin pages. There's basically one admin page, and it uses a bunch of information from TypeScript. There's a metadata layer that drives all of that. And so those are actually generated on the fly dynamically. You have some custom controls that we provide that allow for really easy binding right into your models. And so sort of drop down lists and things like that are literally just one little line of code inside of your view code. Super easy. There's the audit logging that we need to, that just you can plug in just automatically. And then really just best practice config, what we would consider like, hey, this is baseline config for how you should work. So
yeah, that's all your like ESLint and TypeScript config and stuff like that, to be clear. So yeah, this is the page I was just talking about.
Yeah, here we go. This is great.
So this tells you what you're focused on building and what Coalesce is focused on generating. So you can see all the little things with the Coalesce icon on it are things it generates for you. And you can see that's all in the web project. The data project is all stuff that you're focused on building. So your entity classes, your services, your custom business logic. And then on the front end, you're also in charge of your program.cs and your kind of core ASP.NET features. And I know in the previous slide, we said the program.cs is set up for you. That's true. But once it's set up by the template, you then have
doesn't change.
Yeah, it does.
So yeah, that's an important distinction, Meg. So just thinking about when you run the template, that happens one time.
Yeah.
Right. And you get all your projects get set up and all the things happen. But then you're going to run this .NET Coalesce. Whenever I change my data project in ways that affect Coalesce, like adding attributes or adding classes or adding methods or things like that, I'm going to run .NET Coalesce, and it's going to update all the things with the little Coalesce icon at the top. But it doesn't update things like I can't go back and say, oh, I want to add tendency, right? Yeah. It's a different level of change. And so if you wanted to do that, you would go and regenerate from a template and then either move your stuff across or just look at what the deltas are. And make the changes to your app.
Do it just manually.
So I would encourage you to start with a template that has all the things you think you might want, so that you can actually, it's not as hard later on if you wanted to add those things.
It's always easier to delete code.
It is, totally.
Add code. Totally. So just start with more than maybe you may end up needing.
So in this case, you're getting your C# DTOs, which we talked about, which then feed into the C# web APIs. Just again, standard stuff. Those web APIs are driven by kind of an underlying base class that provides all the logic, that then ties into your DTOs. You can see your DTOs are going to have all your security trimming in them. You can see exactly how your security trimming is being done inside the DTO. So if you don't like that, those are partial classes. You can extend them if you want to. You can override things if you need to.
Yeah, and there's some things to keep in mind. So what Grant was saying, where when you make changes on your back end, you have to generate for your front end. He said there are some cases where you don't, some cases where you do. So the cases where you do have to rerun the Coalesce generation are cases where you've directly changed one of your TypeScript view models, or the model that would affect your TypeScript view model, or you've directly changed one of the CRUD endpoints. So things like adding attributes to any of your properties. Adding a new function or a new service, adding data sources.
Anything that affects your front end. Like that's basically it. If you do something that you want to see a change that is going to be reflected in either security or endpoints or objects in your front end, then you're going to have to run the .NET Coalesce thing.
The only time this is an exception is for your save and your delete. You don't have to run Coalesce for those. And the reason for that is that with your update endpoints, your data sources, you can have a bunch of data sources. So every time you add a new data source, Coalesce says, oh, let's make sure we get that data source connected up on front end. You can only have one set of behaviors. So one save, one delete, one before save, one after delete, all those. So Coalesce has those by default. And then on the back end, you're just overriding those default.
Right. So it doesn't actually change.
It doesn't change the connection. It just changes that back end logic. So you don't need to regenerate your front end.
So there's many ways to get data with all kinds of different, including different children and parents and all that. And then you have, but as far as when you're saving, there's a way to save, and there's a class that handles that. So you don't want the front end to be able to override that. So you can bake security and things like that right into all those pieces. So, and when we look at the rest of the stuff here, we have the TypeScript view models, and that's actually broken into several pieces. We have a set of metadata, which basically describes what the objects are. Yeah. And then you have a model, which is just a regular old TypeScript model that it's just TypeScript. It's just a TypeScript representation of your DTOs. And then you have view models, and actually you have an API layer, which are the API callers. And then those two things come together and actually provide you what we call a view model, which view models are just like a model, except when you change things, they're reactive with view so that you get automatic saves and things like that. And you can just literally call methods and use them like you would on the C# side. So I can literally, if I have an object called cat and I have a function on there called meow, I can call cat.meow, and then I can await that, and it will automatically then return whatever the return value is of the meow method.
Feels like a very first-class developer experience, like you're just coding right against your backend.
Right, just like the code is almost identical. I mean,
it is.
It's really like everything is async. So you have all the stuff on your front end is automatically async, whether it's async on the back end or not. It's going to be async on the front end, obviously. And then each thing you call it, and away you go. It's really, again, optimizing for developer happiness is what we do around here.
The only big difference that you're ever going to notice is that things on the back end, like your methods and stuff, if you're following guidelines, are all going to be Pascal case. Things on the front end are all going to be Go case, and that is just to follow TypeScript guidelines and the C# guidelines. So when you're writing your stuff and you're calling cat.meow, and on the back end, it's capital C-A-T dot capital M-E-O-W. On the front end, it's all lowercase. So
Yeah.
just, that sometimes trips me up with a.
But it's really what we're trying to do is make it look like we're not trying to make TypeScript look like C#.
No.
We're trying to let TypeScript be TypeScript. We're trying to let C# be C#. And so
Yeah.
you follow all the standard coding guidelines on the back end and you follow all the standard coding guidelines on the front end, and you should be good to go. Because we wanted it so that when you go and you look things up, you don't have to say, oh, I'm only looking for help with Coalesce. Well, no, you just have a regular view front end, and we use it to Identify. We'll talk about that in just a minute, like kind of why we chose some of that stuff. But it really is, we tried to make sure that we call it coloring in the lines, right? So that when you go look for help, that you're not having to look for some weird stuff. Now, there are, like, if you're looking for how exactly the Coalesce view models do their saving and stuff like that, you're going to have to go to the Coalesce docs, and they'll show you how those work, sample projects, all of those things. And you can go just look in the code. It's not, the code's just right there. It's all, again, client-side code. It's just there.
But if you're looking to await an async method in TypeScript,
It's
that's not.
It's just the standard way you do that, right? You can use a .then, or you can use an await, whatever you need. So.
Yep. Okay, next slide. Data flow.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about how exactly this works. So when you start up Coalesce and you run it for the first time, or even for any time, this is how it works. And so you're going to start off on your client side. So on the right-hand side here, we're going to go ahead and make the client side call. It's going to go to the server, and it has to go and grab the first page. And actually, this first page can be done a number of different ways. Right out of the box, this is actually a page, it's a Razor page that gets returned. So you can modify this page. And folks sometimes want to do this. It gives you some flexibility that a pure single page static app doesn't give you. Now, if you want to go the route of having a single page static app where it compiles and you're done and it never changes, that's fine. You can totally do that. But you also can, based on cookies or things like that, you can grab that initial page coming in. So it's going to hit the ASP.NET router, ASP Core router, and then return that first page. And it's going to return basically the whole view app. And so that view app is going to go back, and you can load it up however you want. It's just a view app. And you can control how it gets compiled and how your files get split and how things load and what you're going to load preemptively and not. Again, just a view app right out of the box. So by that time, you go back to the client, and then you actually have your running view app at that point. So once you have your running view app, you're then going to load up a page. That page is going to have components on it. Just, again, standard kind of view stuff. You're going to have UI elements, and then you have what we would call reactive view models. And so these are the things that Coalesce provides for you. So I can instantiate our beloved cat and call the meow method or the pounce method or whatever it is that I want to call. And then when we load that object, like let's say I want to load up a list of cats, that would make a request using the DTOs back over to the whatever your APIs are, whether they're entity or service APIs, and those are controllers on the C# side, and those are going to send back the response using these DTOs that we pass back and forth. And so the Coalesce infrastructure, the framework, is going to handle all that for you. And so I literally new up an object called the cat on the client side. I call load or I call list or whatever it is. And there are two different endpoints or two different kind of objects, one for list stuff. So I can do all kinds of list filtering and sorting and all that. And then I actually get the objects themselves. So I have a cats effectively and a cat, different object. And I can then call methods on the cat object, but I can also call methods on the list if I wanted to do that as well. You can have your own custom methods, which would basically be static methods on your entities. In this case. And it just does the regular thing. It goes down and uses Entity Framework to grab your POCOs, pull them out of the database, and it uses data sources and behaviors down there to manage that. So you can manage what kinds of things get pulled automatically. You can decide what gets included, all of those pieces, and then ultimately resulting in a round trip back to the client. And it's essentially the same process over and over again, whether you're requesting data or whether you're calling a method or getting a list. It's just the same process of I call to the server goes and gets the data, it gets security trimmed, and I get to decide how I want to kind of form that, and then I shoot it back over to the client side. And then you can bind it up to whatever UI elements you want using different frameworks and things like that. Now it does come with Beautify, which I think is a great view framework kind of right out of the box and makes it easy and kind of helps you fall into the pit of success of making UIs that don't look horrible. It really does a pretty good job. So you can use a different one if you wanted to.
And just to clarify here, we have server and client, and maybe for newer devs that are watching this, those entity API controllers with C#, you noticed specifically on this slide here, those are located in your web project, but not on your client, if that makes sense. So they're in your web project, they're C# files, they're on your server, but they're not in your data project. So that's your generated file. So when you make that call to one of those CRUD endpoints, it goes to that controller, and then it goes to the stuff in your data project that you've defined, and it calls that entity, that POCO, and it checks if you have any custom logic on there, and then it falls through to the default data sources and behaviors if you've called base on those, if you haven't overridden, or if you've kind of called the base behaviors, and then it grabs that information from the database, goes back up, and then goes back over to the client. So the client is it's that subset of your ASP web network.
Yeah, and this really is your TypeScript part. It's the part that's running in your browser.
Yeah.
Right. That, I think that's probably a good way to describe it. Is the client is the browser, and your server is either something maybe you're hosting in AWS or Azure, wherever you're hosting that, or you're running in on local net. Right. You press F5 and started your app up, and there it's running on your machine. So that's going to be your server side, and that's your whole app running. It's your ASP.NET application plus your data backend running as a single app.
Yeah, just make sure not to confuse your client with your web project. It's like the subset of your web project.
Right.
I think that's an easy thing to confuse when you're new to just new to development in general. So.
Right.
All right. So.
All right, let's talk about the stack. So what exactly is going on here? So we're just using C#. That's the base .NET language. I suppose you could port to something else if you wanted to, but that's your call.
Port it to Python if you.
Yeah.
So yeah, C# is just the base language. I think we're on the latest language right now, latest version of it. And then ASP.NET Core, that's just the web infrastructure. Entity Framework Core, I don't think you have to use Entity Framework. Yeah,
you do actually. You're going to have to, because Coalesce is not going to give you all the things.
That's right.
Yeah, you don't have to use SQL. Yeah, you can use other. You don't have to use SQL Server, but you do. It's going to.
Probably should just use Entity.
You could just do different kinds of objects. So you wouldn't have. I mean, yeah, if you wanted to just do services, it might be a little bit tricky.
You could probably get away.
Maybe it's not worth it. I don't
know. So use Entity Framework. TypeScript. So we use TypeScript, and
this is cool because you get full IntelliSense. Like pretty much everywhere you would want IntelliSense on the front end, you get it. And there's a lot of tooling here, and we have on the getting started pages online all the different tooling to use inside of VS Code to make all the stuff work. And we have not built this. There are other fabulous people who have built lots of tooling. We just happen to build our tooling around that so that it provides everything you need. So that even if you're up like in, let's say, a binding up inside of Vue, and you want to do a binding inside of those quotes in your attribute in your HTML in your Vue code, it's going to give you IntelliSense there, which is great. And all the warnings and errors and all of that kind of stuff are just set up right out of the box. So like if you have nullability issues or whatever it is, it's going to find it.
Yep. And then we're using Vue, specifically Vue's composition API in Vue 3.
Yeah, this is where you have script setup. And we just find it's really where Vue is going. Again, we're trying to lean in and get a little bit ahead of all these things so that you're seeing the more current stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of this too is like industry standard. Like you don't see companies writing their web apps in straight up JavaScript. And if they are,
every once in a while, want some super high performance or whatever.
Yeah, if there's either a really good reason that they're doing it, or there's a really bad reason.
Yeah, most times the latter.
There's no in between.
And Vue's really fast. We built incredibly complex pages, and I mean you can't be stupid, but like as long as you're kind of following the best practices of using keys and things like that, it's going to be pretty amazing when it does its surgical updates.
Yeah, and then Beautify is the UI framework that we use, and it's pretty quick too. It does have some very complex components that can be slow, especially ones that like expand or have lots of like updates to them, like lists and data tables.
But as long as you use them the way you're supposed to use them, again, using keys and doing things like that, Beautify works really well. And the reason so it is a material design framework, so a little nod to Google there with the material design stuff. But we've just found that it was a really good general purpose framework that was very complete. And we are on the latest version of Beautify, the one that corresponds with the most current version of Vue. We've actually we have some special components in there. There are a couple of places where there's a few things missing. There's some date picker kind of stuff. If you look around in our repos, you'll find some things that work well with that. But in general, it provides this really nice setup for colors and all your typography, as well as your columns and it's just,
Yeah.
it is a very, very complete framework when it comes to what you get right out of the box. And so there's basically, when we're writing UIs, we write, again, we're writing stuff all the time, and there's enough flexibility you can customize it and make it look how you want, because there'll be somebody in another part of the organization of our company will be writing an application, and it's like, wow, you wrote some Beautify, it looks different, and it's just that base level styling. You go in there, you style it up so your application looks a little bit different than the regular stock things, and we just think it helps you to fall into the design pit of success as much as is possible, right?
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's
Beautify
pretty good.
has, I think, some of the best docs I've come across.
Oh, they're
Their
great.
docs are amazing.
Yeah, they really are. And our lights just went up. Yeah, we have to be more exciting here.
Anyways, yeah, Beautify has some of the best docs that I've come across. They're very, very well written. They have lots of great examples, and the examples are cool too, because they're I don't know what to call it, like customizable, maybe is the word I'm looking for, but like there's checkboxes, and you can say, I want this button to be round, I want this button to be,
and then it shows you the code.
Yeah, it shows you
right
the
there.
code, and code updates live. They're great docs.
And we actually have a video on that, right? Just on Beautify, which has very, very little to do with Coalesce. It just shows you how to use Beautify stuff. So yeah, go and jump into Beautify, look at the docs. And honestly, it is worth going through that, just so you know. It's like having a new set of paints or markers or whatever. You have to go through and look at all the colors so that you know what's possible.
Yeah.
And just do that so you understand what all the different things are. And this is probably one of the harder parts of learning Coalesce, is just understanding what exactly you can do. And again, with kind of the built-in things that come right out of the box.
And the last thing we have here is Vite, even though it looks like Vite, and it allows you to start up your dev environment with just one .NET Run command, or if we're using Visual Studio at the click of a button. And it also gives you that really nice hot reload that you'll probably see in our videos, is as you're writing your TypeScript and you hit your Control Save or whatever you're doing, it'll update your site. It won't even do a hard refresh. It'll just update your site. It's very nice.
And one thing to remember is that when you press F5, it's actually going to start up your entire site.
Yes.
You don't have to run anything from the command line, like, because you'd often do like an npm run dev or something like that if you just had a regular view site. The view site, actually, the execution of that site and the running of the backend V pieces are handled by the .NET framework. So there's pieces in there that do that as part of the startup that just manage that piece for you. So it really is that you do your template, you press F5, and your app starts up, right? So you don't have these two pieces, but you can also see all the compilation steps and all that. They're running in a window there that you can look at as you change stuff. You'll see that. If you have errors, you'll see those right away. And the error experience is really awesome. Like I don't think I've ever done web development that has such a nice experience. You see it in your console, but you also get it on your actual UI on the other end. You'll see an error window pop up and it'll say, hey, here's where your problem is. And it'll give you the exact lines. You can just go back, make modifications. And then most of the time it'll reload automatically. Every once in a while, it gets to a state where you get an error where it actually can't run on the client side. You have to press F5 to refresh your browser. But really, really nice UI experience. And when we talk about this, sometimes we say, oh, this is so nice. Well, Meg and I haven't written, like I may have written kind of version 1 of this, but we have other people that are writing this. So kudos to Andrew and team who really oversee the development of Coalesce and all the things that are going on. They're the ones that are responsible for all of these really awesome features.
Yeah. So what's next?
So what do we do? So how do you get started? You said, hey, wow, this is an amazing podcast. Let me dive into this. And I want to be like 2 or 3 times more productive, at least after the initial ramp up of a few days, probably, or a week. So watch the podcast, go check out the episodes. I encourage you to watch some of the initial ones and go and look at some Vue stuff. Like, we're not going into a lot of Vue. We do cover some of the Vue things. So if you don't know that, or even the ASP.NET or the EF Core, again, we're trying to use these things as out of the box as we can. So if you take up another thing and you're learning C#, you're going to have to know a little bit of C#. You're going to have to know a little bit of Entity Framework. You're going to have to know a little bit of stuff about ASP.NET. And you're going to have to know some TypeScript. You're going to have to know some Vue. Again, Meg and I actually teach a class at Eastern Washington University here in Spokane that goes over all these things. We teach a class and we say, the class actually isn't that hard. And we don't actually use Coalesce in the class. We just teach it. We basically prep it up so that people know how to do all the things that Coalesce does. But it's not any individual thing that's hard. It's just whenever you do web development, and this is going to be true for any web development stack that you choose that is modern, you just have a lot of different things. So you have to know some NPM and all these different kind of command line things, and then source control. And the builds and the CI/CD pipelines and YAML, and there's a lot of things that you have to know. But I think each one you don't have to learn at an incredibly deep level in order to be successful. And so the way that we actually teach our class and the way we really encourage people to learn is to go in and do things. Now, if you're a person that wants to go in and dig into all the details, that's great. It's going to take a while before you become productive, but I think you can get a kind of a cursory level knowledge of a lot of these things and get going, and then learn as you go, which is what we encourage folks to do. Go build something that you're passionate about. Find something that you're excited about, that you want to build, and start building it.
And it's okay if it's not perfect.
Right. Your first one won't be perfect.
You're going to make one, and then you're going to make 3 more, and you're going to look at that first one.
You go, oh no.
Got to hide that from my GitHub.
That's right. And that's just the way it works. I mean, if you're not a little bit embarrassed about your code, well, yeah, it's not one of Elon Musk's rockets. So, yeah, right, exactly. So we find that people really learn by doing it. So Coalesce is really just a way to do that. It's about being able to get out there quickly and build stuff fast. So
yeah, and we don't want to get too weighed down in how Vue works, how Vuetify works, how TypeScript works either, because there's so many videos out there that tell you that. We really want to
way better than us.
Coalesce works. Yeah. So yeah, I think the other step too is for Coalesce specifically, go check out the docs, but also for all the other things, kind of like what Greg was saying, just go learn about all those other surrounding.
And there's lots of links in our docs to other docs that will help you with the Vuetify and Vue and TypeScript and all different pieces.
Yeah, just start a project with the template. Maybe
grab the template. Go to the next one. Like the first episode 001. Yeah. That's going to give you a starter template to get going with. So
yeah, and just have fun.
Yeah, and really, this is what it's about. It is about being able to, because I remember as a kid, I loved Legos because I could have something in my head, and Legos would be this really fast way to bring that thing into reality. And I love that aspect. And if I confess, I still play with Legos a little bit, and just build some things. But really, it's about that with software. It's like, hey, I have this thing in my head, I want to be able to do it, but sometimes you get depressed because you're just like, oh, I don't want to spend that much time because I know it has security and I don't have to do all these different things.
There's so many barriers in the way.
Right, so many barriers. It's like, oh, I have to build that drop down. I don't want to build a drop down.
They're always in the way. It's
right.
Like every time you want to start a new thing, it's like, I gotta do all these things I don't want to do again. So
absolutely. And so our goal is to really make it so that you have an amazing time building first class ASP.NET, Vue, Vuetify, TypeScript, web experiences for people that hopefully just be delighted by the things.
Honestly, enterprise level experiences too.
There's
a number of enterprises that use Coalesce.
Yep.
And
this is a great thing if you have a company and you want to build a bunch of little apps, or if you want to build kind of a framework that you can build a bunch of apps in. Yeah. Great solution. We build apps that have a front end that is, or a kind of an admin side that's Coalesce, and they have a non-Coalesce side that is the public website that is publicly accessible and usable. So anyway, a lot of cool stuff here, and we're just excited to be able to provide something to the community that hopefully makes it so that you can have a great time doing something that you love.
Thanks.
Anyway, until next time, keep on building awesome Coalesce apps.